Hello, everyone. Welcome to Screen Talk Live from my apartment in Long Island City, and Anne Thompson somewhere in early film history, it appears. Anne, where are you exactly?
I like playing with my backdrops. I think it's me, Bridge.
Somewhere in the 1890s in early motion picture artistry, which feels somehow appropriate as we're in this fascinating moment of contemplating the state of the art form and the future of cinema. But for those of you who are tuning in who somehow aren't familiar with this podcast, so welcome. We're glad that you made the time for it. I'm Eric Kohn. I'm the executive editor and chief critic. Anne Thompson, my sparring partner, is our editor at large. And what's kind of fascinating about what we're doing here, Anne, is that it kind of feels like weirdly the best of both worlds. I mean, we record regularly from our homes on most weeks. And sometimes
we can wear whatever we want.
We can wear whatever we want, which is not the case here. But sometimes we do put our grown-up clothes on and we go to film festivals and we do live versions with an audience. So we are kind of doing both of those things at once, even though we can't see the audience. I see that there are so far a good amount of people tuning in, which is pretty fascinating. And
I may have nothing else to do at the moment.
Hey, we'll take it. I have to tell you, it almost feels like for everything that we're talking about on a regular basis, the kind of the ever-changing technology of entertainment and how people watch stuff, we're in it right now. I mean, are you going to watch something on VOD? Are you going to tune in to watch some people talk about the future of movie going? It's kind of all part of the same equation now.
I get a lot of invitations to very inviting things if I only had the time. You know, Eric, you and I are busier than ever. I mean, this is a good thing. I'm not complaining. There's lots of news. There's lots of stuff breaking, lots of things to figure out about how festivals are going to function or how the Oscars are going to function. We're going to get into all of this today, but needless to say, we're still juggling.
So let's talk about all that, because it has been quite the news cycle this week. Of all times for us to do something like this, we have so much to get through. And I have a guilty confession to make. You know, some people, they're sort of shy to admit the stuff they like to watch that they get a kick out of, like trash TV, like reality shows where people are just arguing the whole time. Everything that's been happening most recently with the big movie theater chains and the studios, like Universal and AMC, that's like my version of that. I'm actually
it's dramatic. There's a lot
I'm enjoying it. There's
well,
so
I don't
much.
Let's not take it too far, because there is a lot at stake. I mean, yesterday.
I don't want to be glib about
context, there was a spat. There was a struggle there, you know, and it's been building up for a long time. The truth is that Universal, led by a guy named Jeff Shell, who used to work at Comcast, which owns Universal, which is a big cable company, and this company has been wanting to go into VOD, specifically premium VOD, for a really long time. And finally, they got the chance with this shutdown. And the face-off with the theaters was always that the theaters wouldn't let them experiment, wouldn't let them play around. And now they are getting the numbers, and they went to the Wall Street Journal and they boasted and they crowed and they said, look, we made $100 million on Trolls.
$100 million on Trolls. I mean,
now a lot of people are questioning all the numbers and what's international and how does it affect the rest of the usual chain of ancillaries that bring in money. But at any rate, they did well with it, and they're going to continue. They announced to keep that as an option going forward, not just a temporary thing during the pandemic, but something they're going to use in their arsenal of distribution tricks going forward. And that sent AMC into apoplexy.
Well, one of the things that I thought was fascinating about that is that it's almost like on the macro level, what you've been seeing the indie world do for a while, where it's very opaque, the VOD world. We don't know numbers so often unless somebody does really well. You know, when Radius would come along a few years ago and say, hey, we made $2 million on this, you know, Keanu Reeves martial arts thing or whatever, because that's like pretty good for a smaller movie. This is like suddenly this conversation is happening on a much bigger level, and it's kind of fascinating because it creates way more problems for an industry that's so concerned about the bottom line and afraid to evolve into some new paradigm. They don't want to, and the art houses can.
This is what I'm working on a story about this. I mean, what strikes me about this is that we're hearing anecdotally from a lot of different people that the film festivals, the exhibitors, the distributors on the indie side are getting together. They're sharing information. They're throwing competition aside, and they're saying, hey, let's do these virtual cinemas. Let's bring some money into the theaters during this time. Let's create a big audience of cinephiles who can watch movies in this way. We can actually make money, and they are making money. And I find this very exciting. It doesn't mean it's going to be the same when we come out, you know, it's going to be different. And I think that and people will learn things and have more data and have more ways of reaching audiences in a very constructive, positive, innovative way. On the other hand, the studios and the theaters are at an impasse. They can't talk to each other. They are at odds, and they don't share information, and they don't create ways to innovate. And that is a serious problem going forward when they're under so much duress in terms of coming back and making a business out of this again.
And one of the reasons, to go back to why my guilty pleasure excitement over watching this brawl happen, is that I feel like the value system is so different from my own. You know, the people who I relate to are the people who are really invested in the art of cinema and the culture of movie going in whatever form that evolves into. And it feels like arguments about Trolls World Tour and Universal's big movies and where they wind up, it's not, they're really just concerned about how to make a lot of money on really big product. And I'm more interested in seeing how the stuff that's on the margins survives and comes out on the other side of this. And so it is promising to see that there is progress there with virtual cinemas and so forth. So hopefully that's where we're going.
I hope so too. I mean, there is a weird, there is a scary truth, which is that the nonprofits and the businesses that were always a little marginal are the ones that are the most threatened. And on the other hand, on the big side, AMC, the one that was acquiring lots and lots of theaters, is the most debt burdened. And it's debt burdened people that are in the most threatened position right now. So we're all watching carefully.
And because you can't build a business around such unknown quantities, like a future that could either be a gradual return to normalcy or a second wave of a disease that makes it impossible to go back to where we were.
Right. And if they're opening theaters, I mean, and this is what fascinates me right now, is people are starting to really think about it. How do you go into a theater wearing a mask and gloves? How do you buy concessions, which is where they make most of their money? How do you eat popcorn in your seat?
Yeah,
with three seats around you with a mask on? Do you take your mask off when you sit down? All of these things. I mean, right now we're still in that very scary place of being afraid, to put ourselves at risk. How are parents going to take their kids to see Mulan? Are they going to put their kids at risk in a movie theater? These are the questions that haven't been answered.
Yeah, the kids aren't the ones at risk. Unfortunately, it's
yes,
the kids spreading things. Well, the kids are pretty resilient. It's that they can spread it
risk. You can't make any assumptions.
Well, I think the other thing that is kind of fascinating about this is what it means for older movies on every level of the business. I mean, certainly movie theaters reopening with a dearth of product mean that you're going to have films that you're going to have to show other stuff to get people to turn out. And so there are perhaps opportunities for, say, a theater chain to bring back some films that didn't get the attention they deserved the first time around, or to get people to go see stuff that from a repertory standpoint could be interesting.
They are going to open. Interrupting you as usual.
They are in action.
Can't change. They are going to put in some movies. They're going to have these big DCPs, like with a big selection of product from all the different studios. And the studios are actually contributing, and they're going to have very favorable terms for these. This is how they're going to have a soft opening, and that's going to happen in May, in June. I mean, they're really thinking about. There's a theater in Texas that's supposedly almost about to open. I think it's a bit early, but they are you know what they're going to show? They're going to show Indiana Jones and Harry Potter. That's what they're going to show.
Hey, some people didn't get a chance to see those movies in theaters, and for every couple of years, there's another generation of folks who maybe grew up watching them at home, so it's actually an event movie to go see that, but a perfect way to test the waters, too. I mean, I'm also curious about the way that film festivals get to the other side of this, because we're seeing these attempts at virtual film festivals, and they're very controversial because sales agents see them as not particularly constructive for a movie. You don't know how many people are watching them. Once you put it online, you can't really control piracy, all this kind of stuff. But then this past week, we heard this announcement that Tribeca Enterprises has gotten together all of these different heavy hitters from Cannes to New York to you know, a bunch of other European festivals and across the US and Toronto. And they're putting together this global film festival event. And we don't know what those lineups are going to look like.
That's the issue,
but to me,
Eric. We don't know. I mean, here's the thing. Practically speaking, I mean, I love that they're doing it. But practically speaking, if it's all old movies, if it's movies that have played other festivals like Berlin before, or old Cannes titles, or old Toronto, you know what I'm saying? It's just promoting stuff that's already out there. That's fine. And I'm glad they're doing something. But what you and I are focused on now is how are we going to see the new movies that are part of our lifeblood that we would have gone to see in Cannes.
So I think that's the thing. I think that there is real substantial value to showing older movies in virtual festivals right now, because frankly, a lot of these films didn't get a lot of attention the first time around. So maybe the potential there is almost like this Insta repertoire. So
it's a benefit to lots of different people's libraries.
And it's good for film culture too, for these films that might not get that kind of recognition through the festival circuit to get that boost. And so the virtual festival thing should continue. But I agree. I think what we are seeing is that the opportunity for exclusivity that a festival presents is not something that you can just replicate in the online space in quite the same way. So it does raise some really fascinating questions. And yet at the same time, everyone's being forced to adapt. So wherever we wind up in the fall, we're not really going to know if these films are going to have a platform and whether or not some kind of online component is going to be essential. And that, I think, leads us into the Oscar side of it.
I was going to say that there's a kind of a rolling surge of movies that should have shown at South by, that didn't get onto their platform, that should have shown in Cannes, that should have which probably isn't going to happen except perhaps as a French festival, and then Venice, and all these festivals are going to be local. And where are we going to see those movies? In likelihood, we're going to see them, you in New York and me in LA. Maybe they're going to play at Telluride or play in Toronto or play in New York, but we're going to see them likely in our local sanitized screening room.
You and I were commiserating earlier this week. We were on, everybody's been feeling different kinds of grief for aspects of life they took for granted. We had this kind of charmed life. I mean, right now we would be gearing up for Cannes, and it's a very surreal experience to take that out of the equation and realize how much you've adjusted to that, and to not have Cannes coming up. And these films that we would have been anticipating, it's very surreal because it's not like those films cease to exist. They're out there somewhere in the ether. Let's talk about the virtual market that's going to occur. There's a Cannes virtual market, and they're going to be doing. I think they have actually done this already, where they show a movie to a group of people at the same time, sort of the way we're doing this. They watch the movie and discuss it with each other after, or supply their reaction right after. I find that maybe they'll be doing that for us. I have heard from some buyers who have been to virtual screenings and said that it's worked out okay. If you time it in a certain manner where everybody tunes in at a certain point in time and then it's not available after that, it's essentially you're doing the same act. And then a lot of the deal making, the conversations or whatever, you can replicate. And what we're doing right now, it's like a panel, right? They can have events like this as well as making certain things available to people, and there can be deal making. I think the question is going to be, what's that deal making really going to look like? Is the industry really going to be ready to spend a lot of money when they don't know what they're going to do with these projects. I mean, big projects come out of the market.
So this is what I find interesting is like, how could you replicate that moment where media people respond, where we have a moment where we have just seen something and we can tweet our reaction, and there's an embargo and there's a review thing, and the whole thing that would happen at a festival, we could replicate that.
Yeah,
that's what they want. They want to know, how is it playing for people?
Yeah, I think that you can replicate it only because of the conditions that we're in right now, in which if you tell everyone this is the only time that you can experience this one thing, we might do it. You know, a lot of us waited, whatever it was, 70 minutes to watch that Stephen Sondheim birthday thing in spite of the tech check, right? We were there for it.
I was so frustrated.
But I mean, and I'm only sort of, I'm on the cusp of Sondheim fandom, but I waited around because, well, first of all, what the hell else are you going to do? But also because it was worth waiting around for. And I think
I went off and had my drink date and did whatever I was going to do and came back and watched it later. I actually watched it in the middle of the night. That's what I did.
Yeah, so there is such a thing as a virtual event and eventizing. It can happen when Trolls World Tour, which is where all the conversations inevitably lead back to, Screen for the Media. There was an all media kind of thing where they gave us a link for 24 hours and there was an embargo. So you can do these timed linked things, and if the product is attractive enough to the media, I suspect the media is going to tune in because we don't have any other option. So I do think there's value there.
The other thing I learned is that there are many acquisitions that have actually taken place already from people who have bought movies that were supposed to be at festivals. They screened them and they acquired them, but there's no festival to announce them in. There's no
you need some
context
kind of reason
for announcing them. So I find that interesting too.
Yeah, and everybody's doing business however they can. Nobody just kind of is like throwing up their hands and
there's
stopping.
There's going to be demand for product. A lot.
You have to. And if it means that everything is going to be streamed, I don't know. I mean, we have people listening in today who are working on smaller art house titles, and we have people in the streaming wars space. And I think that it's kind of a fascinating question of, you know, when you are investing in a good new movie, what the best opportunity is for it, because the answer to that question a few months ago is very different from what it would be right now. Everybody's streaming, right? Every streaming platform's numbers are off the charts. Nobody's, you know, getting too public about it, but we know that's happening because we're all part of that. But does that mean that for a smaller, weirder movie that might benefit in a traditional world from a platform release is suddenly going to do really well on streaming? That's so untested that we don't really know. And it seems like there are a lot of metrics and need for experimentation that are sort of on the horizon. So
that's what's good about this. People are learning a lot of new things, and
you have to be willing to experiment.
Yes,
I mean, if you don't take those weird swings.
Which is why I tend to be a little more sympathetic. I think that Universal's being a little harsh and blunt about their approach to PR in this situation. They're playing to Wall Street. They're not trying to mediate with the theaters right now. But in fact, the theaters need to innovate, and they're not, and that's the situation we're in.
Yeah, I mean, there's no attempt to do something on a mass scale like what the art houses are doing with these virtual cinemas, and of course that revenue is minuscule. But it does seem like on some level, at least we're seeing an attempt to give people a product and to let them have that experience and not do it at the expense of the future of moviegoing, whatever that looks like. So, but I rushed into this earlier. Let's get into the Oscars side of it, because that was the other big news this week. The Academy, as we expected, making a serious change to its qualifying rules. So it's not exactly. They had to, but it's interesting. I personally thought it was very smart the way it was formulated, that the theatrical release being waived for, and correct me if I'm wrong, for films that already had theatrical dates planned. A theatrical
right. Basically, no the Golden Globes are the same thing too. And in other words, when the theaters reopen, it's a whole other ball game. But during this period when they're closed, but there's other things too. Like it used to be that if you ever played online before you had a theatrical release, you were ineligible. Now they're recognizing that movies are playing online at film festivals, and they're letting those movies be eligible, assuming they fulfill all the other requirements later on.
So it opens up some really interesting questions about how this year is going to proceed. Does it mean that now a lot of the movies that you would be anticipating as awards contenders will now have some kind of VOD strategy that wasn't going to be there before?
Well, it opens the gates for them to go that way if they want to. I mean, a lot of people are wondering what's going to happen to Promising Young Woman, which is a Focus movie that hasn't come out yet, and that played well at Sundance. And there's a number of unbooked titles. It's really fascinating to look at the schedule, because it's like Tenet is going to go out in July, presumably. That's the big sort of, is that the one, that's going to happen? Nolan is a big believer in theaters. We'll see. And then as you get into September and the end of the year, that's when you start to see movies that are really going to play in theaters because they want to go to the Oscars, things like West Side Story and it's Dune, if it's finished. We'll see.
And there's just no way in hell that a movie like Dune or West Side Story is going to skip a theatrical release.
No.
I mean, it's impossible to visualize something like that even working, because the theatrical eventizing of it is so tied to its DNA. But if we can't go to movie theaters...
So we have to play this out. A lot of people are doing a lot of wishful thinking about the theaters, like, they're going to open, people are going to show up. And I'm like, I don't know. Is that really going to happen?
Knows.
What if there's I don't want to say these things, but, what if there's a cluster that comes out of one of these things? That's a big, bad thing for the theaters, it's all about people feeling safe. For example, they're trying to say airplanes, unsafe. Theaters in the middle somewhere, safe. This is John Fithian, and everybody's buying into this. Would you fly to Telluride, do you think? Would you book a flight?
I will go on the record and say, okay, first of all, if you look up flights to Telluride right now, they are awesomely cheap. So after years of figuring that out, if you want to take a real risk, it won't cost you that much. I said before, of the moments up to South by Southwest cancellation, people were asking me if I would go. I said, if it's happening, I'll be there. I believe in being in the front lines. If I can be on the front lines, I will be there. Now, the question I would have is a festival like Telluride going to be the front lines this year? Or, as you say, is it going to be more of this localized process where you in LA, me in New York, will have different kinds of experiences, because that's just the way that these films are going to be made available?
They're going to have it, and they're going to want people to show up for it, whoever they may be.
I love sitting in that gondola. There's certainly a lot of open air space.
The gondola is the last place you should be sitting. Oh my God!
Well, maybe
that's
just
exactly
one at a
where
time.
You don't want to be.
One person at a time.
Ooh.
I always find it a little awkward when there's stuff to the gills with people, and you have to talk to some stranger who you may or may not agree with. I mean,
I'll never forget being stuck in the gondola with Mike Lee.
Oh, okay, that sounds actually really entertaining. Yeah, I've had a few weird encounters with Herzog in similar situations, but I do love going to festivals in the sense that the experiential side of it is such a crucial part of how you end up processing the year in cinema, finding movies through discovery and through talking to people, feeling like you're playing a role in the narrative. And I don't know if we can replicate that by staying home. So if there is some way for me, at least, to get out of the house and be somewhere that seems to be an extension of where these movies are traveling, then yes, I want to be there. Now, I don't know if other people feel that way.
I want to be there too, but I can't predict today in April how I'm going to feel in August, where we're going to be in August. And that's the point. I mean,
we got to write it out. Write it out and improvise.
Where's your safety? Where's your safety? How do you feel? And that's what it's going to be for everybody.
So should we take some questions? Our creative producer, Leo Garcia, is here with us, and I believe he's been gathering some. So Leo, you got anything that's worth lobbing our way?
Yeah, so I think it's telling how in sync you guys are with all your listeners, because you've addressed a lot of the questions that they've asked. But I think here's sort of a general and big one, and I'm going to paraphrase a little bit. But Jack McDermott asks, do you foresee any sort of benefits or changes that this pandemic will have on the film industry moving forward? Essentially asking, what has changed maybe for the better due to this sort of halt?
Wow.
Some people might not agree with this, but I think that a winnowing out of the theaters is not a terrible thing, to take away some of the ones that are not doing well and are weaker, and having a smaller number of theaters. Any theater owners listen, and I don't mean the art house cinemas. I obviously cherish them, but they're especially on the commercial side, there's way too many screens right now, and it could be that they're stronger and better as a result of a certain kind of Darwinian survival purging, I'm afraid.
I do like that the question asks what good might come out of this situation, because there have been so many open questions about the changing nature of the market for movies and everyone being so resistant to change. And now that they're being forced to change, we're seeing people's true colors and where their priorities lie. I think there is something kind of positive in the sense that there's a huge demand for product of all sorts, and that even older films are suddenly really valuable. One thing that I would single out is that classic film libraries, that term classic being an umbrella term that refers to just a lot of older movies, those libraries I think have more currency now than they did before, because people were afraid, maybe nobody really wants to watch older movies, or there's a smaller audience. Well, now there's a bigger audience for everything. So we're all watching Criterion Channel, but there's also lots of old studio films that have been, sitting around in vaults and so forth that could be really valuable too. So my hope is that we're going to see a greater interest in film history that comes. But
I would also suggest that all of this movie watching at home is only going to benefit movie watching in theaters later on, because people are going to be reminded of how much they love movies. And I do believe that when they feel safe, they're going to flock back to the theaters and be eager to go to the theaters. I think we're all in a more tentative state of mind right now. I would love to see, here's what I want to have happen. I want a studio to buy a theater chain. I don't know which one can afford it. I don't know whether it's Disney or Universal, but I want them to do it so that they can do the kind of collaboration, so that they can do the kind of innovation that is long overdue. Back in the day, the studios owned the theaters, and if they still did, there would be a lot more innovation going on right now. We wouldn't be in the situation we're in, where they're at odds with each other. They'd be in sync.
Well, isn't there some antitrust red tape that has to be?
It's fascinating. There was the Paramount consent decree, but it's been overthrown. It no longer is applying, so they can buy theaters if they want to.
And look, Landmark and Magnolia did really well together for a couple of years there on a very different scale. So maybe there is a real opportunity if a studio owns a theater to also not just be a studio, but to understand the value of opening up to product from its competitors.
What's been going on is that the studios have been very frustrated that they haven't been able to play around in all these different playpens. And if they owned the theaters, then the theaters wouldn't be marooned and abandoned and on their own with only one way to make money.
All right, Leo, what else you got for us?
I mean, that line of thought actually dovetails nicely to this question I wanted to ask, which will drive-ins be a major player in summer movie going this year? Like, is that feasible? I don't know how many there are in the country. I know Tom has been looking into this for the site.
The number that comes into my head is like 300, something like that. But if I were out there, I mean, Eric, you and I have been to film festivals like Locarno, or Cannes always has the films on the plage. Telluride has the films in the park. I've been to Hawaii, where they have great outdoor screenings. And I know that Alamo does a lot of these outdoor pop-up screening things. I'm sure they're planning something, knowing them.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It's a bit of a tangent, but Locarno canceling this week hit me hard because I loved going to that festival. It was one of the festivals I just went to out of pure delight, and the Piazza Grande that they did for 8,000 people every night was just an incredibly unique kind of event, this kind of mass collective experience. But it was not a social distancing experience, whereas drive-ins,
you could restage it that way, though.
You could restage it that way. I love the drive-in experience, and I love its resilience. It almost feels like the way that radio still has currency after 100 plus. There's something about it that just it seems to overcome
you're safe
the limitations
in your car, right? Yep. And if the concessions is still the big question mark for me, but you can also pre-book. A lot of what they're going to have to do at theaters is pre-book, so that you don't have to have a transaction when you get there. more online stuff. I just think there's going to be a lot more, to answer the other question too, a lot more innovation. If you can build theaters at Telluride, they take auditoriums and they have outdoor cinemas and they do all sorts of things. Why can't everybody do them in every place?
I agree, and my heart goes out to nonprofits like Rooftop Films that has really developed an identity in this space, getting people outside. If they can pivot somehow into the drive-in space, I know they could put on a good show, because my hope would be that if drive-ins have this resurgence this summer, that it's not just tentpole type stuff, but that you can actually get some aspect of a wider range of cinema showcased in this environment. I'll also break some news here. I bought a car today.
You did not.
People are like, how do you do that in New York? Yeah, we were talking about it. And honestly, I live in New York City, but we have a garage in our building, so it's feasible.
I didn't know you knew how to drive.
I've been a while since I've been behind the car, so this is going to be an ongoing thing. But it'll be an interesting process. If the drive-in outside Albany, the Jericho Drive-in, which we tend to go to right after Cannes when I visit my in-laws, if that's open, I'll drive up and check it out. I'm putting myself at risk. I'm willing to go to Telluride, but I'll also gladly drive to a drive-in. So this should be an interesting couple of weeks.
I'm going to go to the Kon-Tiki. That's my new. As soon as I get out of my lockdown, I'm going. That's our local one here in LA.
Any other questions, Leo?
I think this one is sort of a bit more about prognostication, but assuming Tenet opens. And with social distancing, this comes from Blake Bell, by the way, who earlier in the questions referred to you as the Benjamin Button of IndieWire, Eric.
Does that mean he's getting
figure that one out
as we go?
I think getting younger.
Perhaps.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what stage in the movie I'm in.
Is he more childlike? I think so, yes.
Oh, I hope so.
Well, he's asking, will Tenet win the box office this year and be favored for Best Picture? Essentially asking, between it and Mulan, will every screen in America have it, even with social distancing over the course of the year?
Okay, so basically this is what people are contemplating, is that they're going to have social distancing in all the theaters, but there's literally going to be one movie playing in every cinema, in every screen, and that will be Tenet. So they'll be
plenty. Be good.
Yeah, they could even do good business in that model, especially if it's all over the world. I mean, China's about to open up again, and that's going to be really important for Mulan. And as for the Oscars, anything that gets open, there may be fewer films in 2020 that actually are Oscar contenders. So that's going to give everybody that actually plays an advantage, I would say.
But we don't really know what mode of Nolan we're looking at with Tenet. I mean, it seems like a fun sci-fi movie and a real sort of brain pretzel kind of experience, like the Inception mode.
It has a time code thing.
Yeah, so I think the question is with that side of things is this the kind of Christopher Nolan movie that the diehard conspiracy theorist fans are going to go crazy unraveling all the little details, and then a lot of Academy members are going to be left scratching their heads, or does it somehow satisfy both sides of the equation? Because just being the big movie of the summer isn't necessarily going to be enough to make it the Oscar movie, right? I mean,
I agree.
Like
it really depends. There's a lot of sympathy for Nolan, though, right now, because he's such a champion of theaters. I don't know. He hasn't gone as far as he would like to with the Oscars. Even Dunkirk didn't go as far as one would have thought it might. We'll see.
Yeah. Sad story. The poor guy keeps fighting for those Oscars, and we feel so bad for him. But he also gets
Mulan would be a likely contender if it opens. I mean, Mulan is an interesting case where a lot of
commercial
people,
movie.
It has tie-ins, it has toys, it has licensing deals. So it has to come out when it's going to come out, just like Trolls did. And so it's a question of if things go sideways with the theaters, Mulan is one of those movies that might have to go streaming to Disney Plus.
To be continued. All right, should we take
one more?
Pull
a lot of people in that way.
That's true. Should we take one more question? Let's do it.
Sure. I mean, you guys have sort of touched on a lot of the people talking about virtual cinema and virtual festivals and the dust up with AMC and Universal. But I think this is, again, sort of a more general picture from Albert Payano. Will the day and date releases have a huge effect after this Universal AMC debacle? Like, is that going to change the way other studios sort of deal with things?
Okay, so we have a Windows question, really. And so the 90 days is the exclusive period that the theaters have been insisting on all this time. And the studios have been trying to push the PVOD window up. And I think that you're going to find some movement there. They're negotiating is what's going on. And we'll see if they can get that window shorter. I think it will happen.
Yeah, it should be interesting to see how day and date kind of plays out, because 15 years ago when that concept first started coming out there, it was so explicitly in reference to, smaller stuff. So
the theater chains won't accept day and date ever.
Yeah, it just
not
sounds
happen.
Like
you have to give them a few weeks at least. I mean, even Netflix gives them about 3 weeks at this point, which is where a lot of people would like to be. I think there's a mid range in there somewhere.
Oh, I have to say, I mean, it's worth reiterating how popular Roma was in New York while it was available on Netflix, and that there is, the more flexible you are,
cinematic scale kind of situation.
But there's room for more than one unusual film on a large cinematic scale from a singular auteur, and I think maybe there's some value in leaning into that potential. So I popped into this Q&A thing, and I see one more question that I think would be worth bringing up here from Donald Clark. And that was, what was the last film you saw in a cinema? And take a reasoned guess as to what will be the next. Anne?
A cinema is different from a screening room. Right.
Well, that's an interesting distinction there.
I tend to see things in screening rooms more than
say screening room theaters. On a big screen. I saw something on a big screen that was a screening room.
So it was She Dies Tomorrow that at the Soho screening room, the Amy Seimetz movie that was supposed to be at South by.
So cool. And Neon bought that, so hopefully other people get a chance to see it. And so it's very, very timely experience. So we were both watching South by Southwest movies when all this stuff happened. I was at Dolby Theater, and I saw this documentary in and of itself that Frank Oz directed of Derek DeGalio's Magic Show. And it's an amazing, powerful, very emotional kind of story. So to me, that's like an ideal thing to get out on streaming, but it was actually really fun to watch it on a big screen too, because of the laughter around me and the emotion and all that kind of stuff. So that was very memorable. In terms of what I think will be the next one, well, I mean, Tenet seems to be staking that claim. I can't really think of any other reason why another movie could come along and do that.
And that's a movie you have to see. They're going to screen it in a big theater. You have to see it in a big theater. There's no substitute acceptable.
Exactly. Okay, I just want to squeeze one more in here, because now I'm looking at this Q&A. I'm sort of fascinated by these. And sorry, Leo, to take away the moderator out of the equation, but then once I started peeking in, I was like, oh, this is actually really interesting. Do you think any of the films that are based on this pandemic will be any good?
Ooh. I can't imagine wanting to watch one. I still haven't gone back and looked at Contagion. That's the last thing I want to do. I liked it when it came out.
That's the thing. It's very disturbing to watch stuff that is on that wavelength. But then you just mentioned a film, She Dies Tomorrow, which is about existential dread,
which has new resonance now and works very well. Absolutely,
exactly. So
I think it'll be like that. I think there will be more metaphorical uses of this kind of people trapped or whatever it is.
Yeah, and ultimately it's going to come down to what somebody's doing, unless what the particular circumstances of the timeline. I mean, if we get a bunch of movies that are all Zoom calls, I think it's going to get pretty grating pretty fast, and there's probably going to be some annoying rom-coms, but we'll probably get some innovative takes too. So I'm open to.
What I'm excited about is that all these writers are home writing.
Yeah.
And they're writing specs, and they're
drinking.
I hope they are. Well, they're doing that too. But I think we could have some amazing stuff come out of this, and I can't wait to see what they've come up with.
Well, as I say, to be continued. Well, Anne, thank you for doing this, and thank you all for tuning in. We hope you had a good time seeing us in our natural habitats, myself here in Queens and Anne somewhere in the 1890s.
When I'm confronted with the real Eric, I remember how fond I am of him.
Truly, truly a good time. Well, thanks again, and we will see you all for another one of these, hopefully at some point down the line, and then again in the outside world. Stay safe out there, folks. Bye.
Thanks for joining in.